Finally, in SEAL training, there's a bell. All you have to do to quit is ring the bell. Ring the bell, and you no longer have to wake up at 5 o'clock. Ring the bell, and you no longer have to do the runs, the obstacle course, the PT, and you no longer have to endure the hardships of training. If you want to change the world, don't ever, ever ring the bell.
You are listening to the Kill the Quit podcast hour presented by Kill Clip Performance Drinks.
Enjoy drinking Kill Clip after sweaty workouts, big rides, full rounds, long days, longer nights, or whenever you feel the need to get back up to full speed.
Kill Clip Performance Drinks for Warriors. Ignite, endure, recover. And now, Mark Zinno.
Welcome into the Kill the Quit podcast. I am your host, Mark Zinno. This week's guest is a former Navy SEAL who was wounded in Afghanistan after being hit with a grenade. Wow, that is nuts. He now owns a company and runs a company called Elite Meat, which helps recently retired special operators get high-quality employment. He is John Allen on the Kill Clip podcast. John, welcome. Thank you for joining me.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Okay, interesting stuff, man. I don't know many people who have survived a grenade blast, so this is fun for me. We'll get to all that, but let's start back at the beginning. You know, I mean, listen, Navy SEALs, it's usually something when I talk to a lot of them that they kind of have like a seminal moment that inspires them, hey, I want to be a SEAL. Because a lot of kids don't grow up saying, you know what, I want to be a Navy SEAL, but it's something that they see or somebody that they meet or they know, and all of a sudden, boom, you know, that's the path that they put themselves on. How did you end up becoming a SEAL? What was your childhood like?
Yeah, no, I definitely did have like the seminal moment that you talk about. So I grew up in a household of like incredibly smart, intellectually driven people. My father and my older sister are both Pulitzer Prize winning journalists, and my sister's a PhD candidate. She's choosing between, you know, Columbia and some other really good school. My mom's got a master's and she's this professional writer. And then there was me. And like I had all the talent to be smart and do well in school and kind of do all the things that you think you're supposed to do. But I just I bombed school. I didn't take it seriously. And I totally saw myself as like a rebel to my family a little bit, but like in that way that I was really not even that cool and just kind of failing at school. I ended up going to college, not because of my grades, but because my mom, who's this amazing writer, wrote my essay, and it was like such a profound essay. It was literally so good that they called me and they were like, despite your grades, your essay was so well done, we're going to accept you into our program. So I go to college. John, hold on,
but like current news, like you heard what's going on with all these people trying to buy their way. Wow. I mean, that is
totally scandalous. I shouldn't have been in college, to be honest. And like my first semester, not only did my bad grades and truancy and just being an all-around just lame person, there was this huge riot that kicked off after our football team lost the Division I AA championship. And so naturally the school is up, riots, and there's this huge riot. And like, I'm this idiot who's like failing school, who's like already in trouble and like lying to my family, saying that I'm getting straight A's and going to law school and everything's great. And I like go out and I'm like part of this huge riot, and like there's like riot police, and like I'm all over all the cameras that like taking pictures of everybody in the riot. And like following the riot, there was like a witch hunt of all these people that other people recognized in the photos. And they were like telling the police, hey, I know this person, who maybe it was like their enemy or something. And they were like diming out people that were on these like security camera footage stuff. And so I was all over these pictures. Wow. So I'm like, oh my God, it's only a matter of time before somebody calls me out, and I'm failing school. I haven't gone to class in like a month. I'm like a complete joke. And so I had to like tell my family, hey, I'm not getting straight A's. I'm actually failing school, and I'm probably going to get expelled because of this riot that I was in. And so I withdrew from school basically to avoid being expelled. Right. And I go home and I'm living in my mom's basement. And it was like, that was the moment that I'm like, I am a complete screw up. And my family did not react with, we're going to take you in and we're going to help you get back on your feet. It's like, you screwed up, dude. You figure it out. You have exactly 1 year before you're out of the house. And so, you know, I got a job at a gym, and I went to a local school, and I started getting my grades up. But then my mom, of all people, she like randomly tells me, she's like, hey, by the way, a close family friend of ours, well, her two brothers are both Navy SEALs. Maybe you should just go talk to them because maybe you'd be interested in doing that. I was like, how do you like have a network that includes Navy SEALs, Mom? You're like a librarian.
Seriously,
like,
right?
So,
Those two don't end up together in the same sentence.
and so I end up like kind of on a whim going and meeting these two Navy SEALs that are family friends. And to be honest, it was like, not only did they impress me just in virtue of being a SEAL, but it was like they had kind of the pockmarked history kind of leading up to when they decided to be a SEAL. It was like they hadn't really figured out what they were going to do until they found BUD/S. And the beautiful thing about going to BUD/S and becoming a SEAL is it kind of rewrites everything that you've done to that point. Like you're no longer the kid who was in the riot, who barely made it through school and should have gone to college. Now it's a funny anecdote if you become a SEAL about the guy who ultimately became successful. And so I saw it as like this great opportunity to kind of rewrite who I was and also kind of go on my own path that was not in academia. And so really being around these two SEALs really inspired me. And after college, I enlisted and went to BUD/S.
All right. But let's back up for a minute because I kind of want to ask you about the family dynamic because, you know, did you feel pressure as a kid? Like, did your parents or your sister and everybody in all their success, was that just something subconsciously you felt like you could never live up to?
Yeah, I think so. I think that, look, I knew I was, you know, smart enough. Like I had the aptitude to kind of go and become like an intellect and get some great job and be really well educated. But I also knew that required an enormous amount of work, even if you're really smart. And I was just really lazy and wanted to like go hang out with my friends. And so I decided I would just kind of position myself so that I was doing something different, like air quote, I want to do something different with my life, which really meant I wasn't willing to put in the work. And I think it was because I just was scared that I wouldn't live up to my family, even though I knew I could. I just didn't think I'd be able to put in the work for it. And it was like, I just kind of covered it by acting like, oh, I don't want to do what the family's doing. So there was pressure there for sure. I think I was just lazy, to be honest.
What were you doing in college that you weren't going to class? I'm just curious. I mean, you know, listen, I didn't skip class a lot. I've certainly skipped my fair share, but, you know, like I had work to do. I kind of get bored sitting around all day, so I kind of went to class to kill time, if that makes any sense, during college. So what were you doing the whole time while you were not in class?
It's like so lame. So I would skip class and then I would just like play video games in my dorm. And then I became like unnaturally good at this one particular video game called Skate, which is a skateboarding video game. And so I became world ranked at it. And so I would like skip class to like dominate 12-year-olds in a skateboarding video game online.
Well, listen, at least you finished first against them, right? There's probably some solace in that.
Yeah, so it was a kind of a joke.
But how do you get a ranking in a video game? Like, does someone call you?
Well, actually, it's so that the game is set up where it's like a game of horse and basketball, but it's in a skateboarding game. But unlike, you know, the Tony Hawk's Pro Skater games, which it required pretty much like some combination of, you know, buttons to do any trick, this game, everything was done with the two joysticks. So it required like memorizing patterns in order to do it. And so you would basically like be pitted against somebody else, you know, online that's playing Skate, and you'd set a trick, you know, and they'd have to match it. And if they didn't match the trick, the exact one you did, they get a letter until they spell SKATE. And if you get all 5 letters, you lose. And I just never lost. And I played enough and never lost that at some point I started noticing these notifications, like little emails being sent to my PlayStation. And I didn't know what they were. I just kind of wrote them off. And it was like 70 new notifications, 100 new notifications. And then it was like 1,000 notifications. And I was like, okay, what is this? What are these random things popping up on my screen? And I opened it up and it was like thousands and thousands of messages, everyone from like EA Sports to like kids that were other, you know, top ranked gamers being like, man, you're not even that good. Like, you shouldn't be number one. You're terrible. And guys like, oh my God, you played my brother last night. That was so cool, man. So it was like this hilarious, like a mix of hate and fan mail, and like the actual developers saying like, hey, if you're interested, you can beta test this product. But it was like, I was receiving them well after the fact, so I couldn't really do anything with it. But it was like, I became ranked accidentally and was literally the best in the world at Skate 1 and then Skate 2.
Well, but now there's like scholarships for this stuff and everything, right? Like, did you ever think at that point in time you could capitalize on this?
Not at all.
Oh, okay.
It was honestly so embarrassing to tell people that like oh, by the way, I'm literally the best in the world at this video game, because this was definitely before like the wave of esports being mainstream.
Gotcha. Okay.
And it was also like the way this happened is I was spending so much time when I was skipping school to play a video game. So it's like a whole narrative that I didn't want people to know about.
Sure, but I mean, at least you're perfecting a craft, so there is some, positive to that part, right? I assume.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's actually very stressful when you realize you're ranked. Like when you're playing people, it's like, even though it's a game, it's like if I lose this game, then I don't become the number one in the world. And so every game was like super high pressure game, but it was like so much fun because I just won every single time.
I mean, you, Tiger Woods, Roger Federer, obviously the number one ranking gets to everybody, so there is that.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so you meet these two Navy SEALs and you decide that's what you want to do. For somebody who just characterized himself as lazy, did you know that BUD/S and being a SEAL was the opposite of lazy?
It's funny. It is the opposite of lazy, but it's a very specific type
of not lazy
work. It's misery. It's like, how much misery can you endure? And that was something that I had found. Like, I put myself in positions time and time again where like I'd screw up and come home and like face the wrath of like seeing my family being disappointed in me, or like, I had all this stuff that just happened in my life where like time and time again, I just felt like I kept putting myself in bad situations that were totally, I created them. Like, they were negative situations that I created through not doing what I was supposed to do, that I saw BUD/S as like, okay, like I was in really good shape. I was early into running and stuff. So I was in good shape. And I was like, you know what? Like, I can suffer. That's something I'm actually pretty good at doing. That's like a skill set I think I have. I have no idea if I'm going to be good enough to be like, to graduate and like do the technical training. But I was very confident that I would be able to suffer with the best of them. And I could go to BUD/S and I could put my head down and I could just deal with the suffering. And it was true. And even as I looked back at my experience in BUD/S, it wasn't like, I showed up and evolved over the course of the training and like learned these skills that helped me get me through. It was like from day one, I had the kind of grit that's required to get through. I only realized I had it for real. It was validated when I completed the course, but I always had it. And so I was on to something when I saw BUD/S. It's like I can suffer really well, and I'm going to go do that. And I'm going to rewrite my history and no longer be the mediocre, idiot who just like skips schools and plays video games.
That's interesting. When you finish up college and, you get your degree, even though it wasn't a high-end school or anything else, what did your parents say to you? Were they proud, or was it just kind of, were they relieved that you actually completed it? I mean, what was that all about?
Well, it's funny. Like, I actually didn't reveal to my family. Well, so after my failings at the first semester in college, and I came home and I was going to a local school to get my grades back up. I got my grades back up enough that I was actually able to transfer back into the original school, UMass Amherst, because they have an automatic reacceptance policy if you've done XYZ, and I did that.
Really?
But yeah, it was funny. I had to go sit down with the dean, and they're like, okay, John, you were a complete joke when you were here, but technically we have to accept you back. So they gave me all these restrictions. Like, I had to live in the dorms. I wasn't allowed to have an apartment, and like, you're going to check in with this person. It was like I was on parole going back, but I was allowed back in, and I was totally a straight shooter at this point. But I had learned almost immediately when I got to UMass Amherst again. I had 2 more years there. It was my junior and senior year. It was my junior year that I met the 2 SEALs. And I didn't really let my family know that, like, I'm actually pretty inspired to do this. Because I didn't know how to articulate, like, the guy who can't do anything or really finish anything. Like, I didn't do well in school. I dropped baseball. Like, I dropped this. It's like, I'm the guy that's never followed through. How am I going to convince my family
that you're about to take the most difficult undertaking in the world? Yeah.
Yeah. So I kept it to myself. And even worse is I knew I was going to enlist and not become an officer. 1, I didn't have the grades to get an officer billet in BUD/S. But 2, going enlisted gets you to BUD/S faster.
Sure.
And so
yeah,
I graduate, and they're like, great, John, like, this is great. You got your degree, you turned your life around. And like a week later, I'm in the Navy recruiter's office enlisting, or asking to enlist, i.e. throwing my degree to the wayside because it's totally irrelevant to like go be a SEAL. And so I dropped this bomb on my family, like, yeah, now that I've graduated, I'm going to do this thing that doesn't require a degree, like, doesn't fit my personality at all. So it was some shock and awe, but I mean, honestly, when I finally graduated training and everything, they looked back and they're like, actually, it makes a lot of sense. This is a good path for you.
Now, what year was this when you got in the buds and enlisted?
So I ended up going into the Navy December 2010, and I was in buds for the bulk of 2011.
Okay. And the only reason I ask, again, just for the listeners, for context, I mean, we got 2 wars going on at that point in time. Nobody in your family ever blinked an eye at the whole thing? Because, Navy SEALs kind of go right to the front, like we're cutting the whole line here.
Yeah, honestly, my mom was my whole family was supportive, but there was definitely beyond whether or not you can even make it through the training, assuming you do make it through the training, like what you just said. I mean, the reality you're not like becoming a Boy Scout. You're going through all of this training in order to fight on the front lines. That's the point of being And so my dad, really more than my mom, it isn't that he took exception. He was very proud, and he was very, he was kind of amazed that this was what I was going to do. But he was very obviously torn, because on the one hand, it's, he's very proud, but on the other, it's like he didn't want to lose me. And it really stood out that he would have been really happy, honestly, if I quit or if I stopped doing it just to protect his son. And that was tough to have those conversations where I'm like, Dad, this is what I want to do. But now that I'm a parent, granted my kids are 3 and 1, but I can see the anguish of parents that know that their child's going to be in harm's way. And there's really no 2 ways about it. And that was it. So it was difficult, but ultimately the family was behind me, and we kind of came to terms with it. And by the time I was shipping off to Afghanistan, they were confident that my training was good and I was ready.
It's funny you bring that up, because the same scenario for me. When I deployed, both times I was single, I had no kids, no family, nothing. And, I knew that my family and my mother were laying in bed at night, sleepless and just dreading every time the phone rang. You kind of just, your heart may skip a beat at times. And it's not until you become a parent yourself and, my kids see me in uniform and I want to join the military. I'm like, maybe you don't want to do it. Not that there's anything wrong. Again, it's a wonderful profession. It's been great to me for nearly 20 years. But the point of the game changes when it's your kid, right? It's totally, and you don't really realize that whole thing until you have children of your own. You can run around with your hair on fire all you want and not worry about what your parents think, because it's your life. But when you have children, it's the ultimate game changer. So
100%.
Very well said. He is John Allen, our guest this week on the Kill Cliff podcast. When we come back, we'll go through John's time through buds and, what it's like being blown up by a grenade. That's coming up next on the Kill Cliff podcast.
You're listening to the Kill the Quit podcast hour, presented by Kill Cliff Performance Drinks.
Kill Cliff, performance drinks for warriors, to get you up, get you through, and get you back to full speed.
And now, back to the show with host Mark Zinno.
Welcome back to the Kill Cliff podcast. I'm your host, Mark Zinno. This week's guest is former Navy SEAL John Allen. He now owns and runs the company called Elite Meat after spending time in Afghanistan as a Navy SEAL. And let's pick up where we left off. So you enlist into the Navy right out of college, and you're heading to BUDS. Did you have any idea what BUDS was about? I mean, when these SEALs talk to you, what did they tell you? What did they say? Because usually when people ask me about the military experience, it's really hard to give them anything in a short conversation. It's going to take hours for me to explain to you the full complement of the military experience. What was war like? Well, gee, that's a very open-ended question with a not short answer. So when you ask them about BUDS, what kind of information did you get?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It's a difficult thing to articulate. And so, to be honest, a lot of the advice and the general kind of theme around what is BUDS like, what is, being a SEAL like, it was kind of bizarre, because at the time I really didn't appreciate this, but it was almost like they had a fond memory of BUDS. They jokingly refer to it as the best time I never want to have again. Mm-hmm. So when you get a bunch of SEALs talking about BUDS, because the 2 of them, when I was talking to them, and then when I talked to other SEALs as well, there's so much camaraderie that's built through struggle, and that's true across the military. I mean, that's the essence of.
Well, it's true across life, right? I mean,
it really is.
I mean, people who have cancer or whatever, and I mean, you go back to that movie, The Bucket List, with Jack Nicholson and Morgan Freeman. They both have cancer and they're in the hospital together, and they, anytime you have suffering and you do it with somebody, it's an unbreakable bond.
Yeah, that's exactly right, and so I was listening to them, and it was just very inspiring, because when you read about BUDS online, really all you see is, test gates that seem impossible and, facts and figures like between the attrition rate and how many miles you run and how much sleep you don't get and all that. It can be very intimidating. But when you're talking to an actual SEAL, they speak fondly about it. And it's not made up. It's because it was a defining moment in their life and it really made them who they are today. And so I was able to do a lot of research on buds and know really well, like what was in store, like what did I need to do, what test gates there were and how long each phase was. And I knew the kind of logistics of buds. But what really mattered and what helps me get through is that the people that make it to the other side, one, they don't regret it. But two, it's almost like you look back fondly because it changes who you are in such a positive way that I loved the idea of just putting my head down and going through this thing, because being around and hearing the stories of people that had done it before, it was always positive. Always. No one talks negatively about buds after they've done it. It's only in a joking tone, like, oh yeah, that sucked. Like, that's about the extent to which people will bash buds. The reality is even though it's tremendously painful and difficult and like you don't sleep and it's horrible, you never look back negatively on it. And that was what I took away from a lot of the SEALs I spoke with, is they loved it. They were so proud of it, and I wanted that experience for me.
Well, and part of that is where the Navy SEAL motto comes from. The only easy day was yesterday, because it's 100% true going through buds. The easy day was yesterday. Today is going to suck, and tomorrow is going to suck, but yesterday was easy, comparatively speaking. So I kind of get that mentality. It's weird. A part of me feels like, and I've deployed with the Special Forces in the Army, so I know enough about the community and what, assessment selection is like and what you guys have to go through. But part of me always felt like I wouldn't want to know, because if I built it up in my head, it would be harder for me to overcome. If I was unprepared for the mental challenge that was ahead of me, I would only embrace the moment that I was in and not worry about what's next. Was there any of that? Did you think that you kind of mentally over-prepared for it at all?
Definitely. And a good example would be, so when you do research about buds, it's broken into 3 phases. It's a total of 6 months. But, the first phase, like really any other selection program, is really the most brutal, because it's supposed to weed out people quickly. And on the first day or the second day of first phase, it's public knowledge that you need to conduct the 50-meter underwater swim, which all it is you get in the pool and you jump in and you swim 2 lengths of the pool all on a single breath hold. But it's just enough that it's really difficult to do in training. Like, it's a long distance and it's really stressful and it hurts and it's intimidating. And it's one of the first test gates you're going to do. And if you can't pass it, you're out of buds, 1 day in. And so nobody wants to be, out on the street, after the first day. And I remember when I would talk to SEALs about buds, when I knew I was going to go, when I had a contract signed and I was basically just waiting to go, I became obsessed with how do you pass the 50-meter underwater. And it's funny, like when I got to buds, because by the way, there was no advice that really helped. It was so much fear in me that like, I'm going to have to show up and already be super intimidated and then pass this thing that scares the hell out of me. But like when I showed up and actually was told to do it, like get in the pool, do it, it's your turn. It was like, I just did it. It's like the beauty of just doing something and not thinking about it. It kicked in. And it's funny looking back at the 50-meter, like having completed buds and having completed the other training that we do, like that may have been the single easiest test gate in all of training, because you're healthy, you're rested. It's one of the first things you got to do. Like, you're mentally strong and it's not very difficult. But if you're not experiencing it, it's very easy to hype something like that up. And I think a lot of people do that with buds, is they look at the test gates and the specific things that you have to pass and the attrition rate, and it becomes too big in their head and they believe they can't do it. I started down that path, but as soon as I got there, I just kind of recognized that it's a matter of doing it, not so much thinking about doing it. So I think that I was close, but ultimately, I had my epiphany as soon as I did that 50-meter, and I was like, it's just about doing it. You can't think about it. You just got to do it.
What was the toughest experience for you throughout buds?
So I wasn't a particularly good bud student. I'm not saying that to like pretend to be humble. It's just true. I was. Well,
you have a track record for not being a good student, so we know.
Yes, exactly. So it just continued. But what I really had is I was prepared to not quit, which really is not like a thing that you're thinking about over the course of the day. It's just part of who I was. Is just, I'm just going to suffer here because I know I can do that. I can at least do that. And so that is one component of buds. You do need to be able to just show up every day. And I had that. But I was terrible in the water. I was very uncomfortable in the water. I was a great swimmer, but in terms of water confidence, I really didn't have that. I didn't have it going in. And I kind of believed that, buds training would make me confident, when in reality, it's not really about building water confidence. It's about testing water confidence. And I didn't really have it. And so the water evolutions for me were like, to say I was stressed out before a water evolution is not doing it justice. Like uncontrollable shaking, vomiting, like so nervous I can't think or speak. And then it was like one of the harder water evolutions is pool comp, which you do halfway through training, and it's basically 20 minutes of an instructor like wrestling with you and like ripping off your gear or your scuba gear underwater. And it's like you've been trained to go through all these emergency procedures that like to a T you will follow, no matter how much air you haven't had, no matter how long they're like pummeling you. Like you have to follow the procedures and demonstrate you can stay calm in the worst situation underwater. And it's a 20-minute test. And I was just terrified, and I completely failed it. Like you get 4 attempts in the class you're in, and I failed all 4. I literally didn't come close. And it dawned on me after failing the 4th time, I'm like, I'm going to be the guy that gets through Hell Week, gets into second phase. And then just my water confidence was so bad. I was like panicking, and like I wasn't following procedures. It was a joke. But they rolled me, they rolled me into the next class because they were like, okay, here's your silver bullet. You're going to go to the next class. You're going to start second phase all over again, because you don't start from the beginning of buds that, there's certain wickets you hit. And when I got back into the next class and we got to pool comp again, I had spent like a month or 2 practicing this test, and I felt pretty good about it. And in the first 2 attempts out of the 4 that I was going to be given in this next class, I was confident, but I screwed up procedurally late in the test. So like the 18th minute, one of my straps was twisted and I missed it. And it was not from I'm panicking. It was just a reality of it's a complicated thing. You need to do over and over and over again. And I made a mistake, and the standards are very high. And so I failed these first 2 attempts, and it totally got to my head. And the way they structured is you do the attempts on a Friday. So the people who fail those 2 know they're going to come in, they're going to have to sit through an entire weekend and then show up on Monday. And the first thing you're going to do is your 2 retests that if you fail, you're out. And so I went into that weekend with my wife, and it was like, holy cow. Like I have one day, Monday, that if I don't pass the single hardest thing I've ever done in my life, I'm definitely going to be dropped from training. And so it's probably the only time in my life where I went into that flow state, where when I got in the pool on my 7th attempt, it was like I literally believed that my life hinged on my ability to pass this test. And I passed it because it was like I was literally prepared to drown in order to pass this test. And it's amazing how comfortable and easy that test was. But it was only when I was really forced into that. But man, those first 7 attempts, it accumulated to like 80 minutes of failing pool comp over and over again. And it was like traumatic. It's horrible.
Wow. So when you get to the end of buds and you graduate, level of pride, how proud were your parents? I mean, you did this thing, this impossible thing that almost felt like you could never do. What are you feeling when it's all over?
I mean, really, there's very little that matches getting your trident, like literally pinned to your chest in front of your family, because it's really this moment where hard work over a long period of time is rewarded spectacularly. Like under the bright sun in San Diego on the historic grinder, where like this is buds. And I'm at the podium, and the command master chief is pinning my trident to my chest, and my entire family's there. It's like the proudest moment of my life, and nothing really comes close. But the quick realization you have, and I think everybody tends to have this, is as soon as you graduate and you are a SEAL now, everything changes. You're no longer in a training pipeline. Now you are like, you're going into combat. That's what you're supposed to do. And everybody thinks about that. That's why a lot of people join. But training takes so long. It takes years, practically 2 years to just become a SEAL. And you start to believe that like your job as a Navy SEAL is like training. But really that's not your job. And you realize it after graduation. You're so proud you've made it, but you're like, oh, that's right. Now I'm going to go do this job for real. and your family realizes it too, because now like the pomp and circumstance is kind of gone, and now it's like time to go to a SEAL team and do a workup and deploy, and you're excited about it, but it's very different. It goes from this is an amazing thing to wow, this is a real thing.
Yeah, it's an interesting transition. And from SEALs I talk to as well, you get to your team, you spent so long proving yourself in BUD/S and everything, and then when you get to your team, it almost is a reset, right? You have to prove yourself to your team again.
Absolutely. I mean, you do. I mean, like you show up, and even if it wasn't structured, like you will do these things to prove yourself. You walk into the team for the first time, and you're like the greenest, newest, haven't done anything. And I remember the first guy I met, like he was missing an eye from an IED blast. And I walk in and he's got his op camis on. He looks like super ragged. He just got back from Afghanistan, huge beard. And here I am in my dress blues, like ready to join the team. And it's like the intimidation factor was so high. And everywhere you go, it's like everybody knows you're a new guy because you look it, you smell it, you are a new guy. And it's just like you can't hide. And everywhere you go, you're under the microscope. But like through that kind of crucible, you really realize how well trained you are. And, it's actually kind of useful to have a watchful eye on you because it's a lot like BUD/S in training. It's something you're used to. It keeps you accountable. And so by the time you're actually leaving for deployment, even though you're proving yourself every day, you're used to it. And so when you go, you feel very ready for deployment.
All right. So when do you get to your first deployment?
So we deployed to Afghanistan in 2013, right at the end. So we were in Logar, and, it was, towards the end of OEF, we didn't really know what we were going to be doing while we were there. We hoped, as warfighters do, we hoped that we would, have an opportunity to actually see combat, but we really didn't know. And we had really good leadership at our site that were really aggressive in pushing missions and trying to get them approved to get us to go out and have the experience of actually fighting a war. And so we did get the opportunity to go out, and I within probably a month or so, even though it was the winter, we got into our first gunfight, and it kind of got the nerves out of the way. Being shot at the first time is, I'm sure it's like this, it's a big deal, and then you're just kind of like, this is normal now. And then things really ramped up in the spring, and as we had this one particular mission where we went into this town. It was a known bad guy town, and pretty much every time you go in there, you get shot at. But this was towards the end of our deployment, and like at this point, there really isn't even any new guys anymore. It's just a team that has been, going out and getting in gunfights and doing kind of SEAL work for the better part of 4 or 5 months. And so everybody's very comfortable and like they're used to this environment. And we ended up getting ambushed in the middle of this town, and it spurred this kind of long, drawn-out, rooftop-to-rooftop kind of gunfight with fighters that just kept disappearing into these tunnels they had dug. And it was just like chaos. And at the end of the night, we had a number of our Afghan partner force that got shot during the initial ambush. Our dog got shot, and it just felt like we really hadn't accomplished what we wanted to. We went into this town, we got ambushed, a bunch of people got hurt, and that was it. And it was like frustrating that we knew there was all these fighters all over this town, but we didn't know where they went or really what they were even doing. And so like, we're just frustrated, and we're all broken into our different fire teams, little, 6-man teams all over the town. And it just so happened that, the UAV overhead, they called down to our JTAC, who was in my fire team, and they're like, hey, we actually spotted a group of people that are, 200 yards away from where you guys are now. We think they have guns. We don't really know, but they're definitely hiding behind a wall. And so our fire team was like, you know what? Let's just go over and see what these people are doing. We really didn't have any plan other than let's go take a look, because there's been nothing going on the past hour where we want to find the people that shot our guys. And so the way it was communicated was like, okay, we're going to drop basically a strobe from the UAV, like, and that's where you need to go. And so we walked to the spotlight thinking we were going to be able to peer over this wall and like look across this field and see these people like 100 feet away or whatever. But when we get to this wall and we're like in the spotlight, it turns out that the people were actually on the immediate other side of the wall.
Oh,
and
at close range, so to speak.
Like less than a foot away. And we snuck down this alleyway to this T intersection where we're kind of like where the base of the T meets the head of the T. We're like kind of there. And they're on the other side of this, 5-6 foot tall wall, and we can hear them talking. And there's only 6 of us, and it's pretty clear that the people on the other side of the wall haven't heard us yet, but we hear them. And, it's nighttime, we're on night vision, and there's this strobe that's infrared that's flashing, that we're in. And we realize that if we don't do something right now, if they hear us and we start moving away, they're going to shoot us.
Trouble.
Like we're kind of trapped. We have to do something. And so without saying anything, our team lead just got on his knee and tapped his leg, and he had one of our guys peer over the wall and engage them. And sure enough, I think there were 7 of them. They were holding grenades with pins out, like for this moment, in case they were stumbled upon, they would take people out with them. And so in the initial volley of our teammates shooting over the wall at them, grenades came over the wall, and one actually hit my shoulder and landed next to me, and it detonated. And there was another one that detonated nearby. And it's an amazing thing when you really feel like you're going to die. It isn't like a sad thing. It's not you're not having, my life didn't flash before my eyes. It was more like I was acutely aware as soon as that grenade hit my shoulder that like I'm definitely about to be killed. It was just a fact. There's nothing else. Your mind is aware of what's happening. Time really did feel like it slowed down. And when it detonated and I didn't die, from the blast, I was really surprised. I was like genuinely like, oh, I'm alive. And it literally like was like, wow, I'm still alive. And then I realized I couldn't stand. And it turned out that, afterwards, when I spoke to some people that were there, that, basically thrashed the side of my hip and my leg. And so my other teammate was really badly wounded. He was hit in the lung, it collapsed his lung. Pretty much everybody there was fragged. But by some miracle, all the good guys lived, really because our medic, who after initial concussion got up and like literally under fire, like performed life-saving medicine on me, on the others, dragged people to safety. And I mean, if it had not been for him recognizing that I was bleeding to death, I didn't put my tourniquets on. I was like dying. It's like I woke up and there he was, like saving my life. It's just, wow. It's a profound thing, and it's hard to articulate it other than it was so clear that I was going to die, and it was so surprising that I didn't. And then it was like, oh, that's right, now I'm bleeding to death and I'm going to die. But at least I lasted, a couple more minutes. And then I kind of keeled over, and then I wake up, and there's my buddy saving my life. And
all right, put that thought on hold. Put that thought on hold 1 second, John. We do have to take a time out. We're going to pick up right where you left off on the Kill Cliff podcast right after this.
You are listening to the Kill the Quit podcast hour presented by Kill Cliff Performance Drinks, proud partner of the Navy SEAL Foundation.
Welcome back to the Kill Cliff podcast. I'm your host, Mark Zinno. This week's guest is former Navy SEAL John Allen. When we last left off, John's life was in the balance after a grenade went off literally right at his feet. And so you kind of said you just come to, and there is the medic performing life-saving procedures on you. Were you aware how bad your condition was, or were you just kind of trying to figure out what was going on?
Well, there was a couple things. I think that my memory of the night is definitely, I think it's a little bit foggy, because what I found out later is that my conception of how long things took from blast to being pulled away to having a tourniquet put on was very different from what the medic talked about. It was just, I mean, when you get knocked unconscious and there's grenades going off and everybody's like unconscious, it's a pretty hazy thing. But for me, I think another critical piece of the story, and it's one that I've written about a couple of times on social media, is, when the grenade came over the wall and it bounces off my shoulder and lands next to me, and I have this realization that this is going to be the end. I knew, or at the time, I believe I knew that I needed to jump on that grenade to protect my teammates. Like I had to. I knew it was coming. It hit my shoulder and it landed next to me. And I didn't. I turned to shield myself. And I kind of knew that I was supposed to do something that I didn't. And so when the grenade went off and I was surprised I lived, I remember it was hazy and I think I got dragged to this wall kind of nearby, and I really couldn't get the tourniquets off of my kit to apply them to myself. I knew that there was a big enough pool of blood underneath me that I knew that, like, okay, I'm probably bleeding to death, and my vision was gone at this point. Like, I was blind, and everything sounded like a helicopter. But what really struck me was I heard down at the initial site the screams of my teammates, and I knew that I could have saved them, and I didn't, right? And so now I'm like, I don't know if I want to put my tourniquets on, and so I'm just sitting there like, you know what? I don't know if I can even live with myself if I make it through this. And so I actually decided not to put my tourniquets on. And frankly, probably wouldn't have the strength to get them on anyways. And it was very shortly after that I keeled over. And then sure enough, my medic, who literally saved everybody's life, all of a sudden he puts the tourniquets on, he finds the bleed, and he gets me stable again. And I remember he was so calm and reassuring. Like, we're literally being shot at actively. And this guy he's in his own state of flow. Like, he knows what he's supposed to do. I'm, capable of saving everyone, and that's what I'm going to do. And he did. I mean, he literally, not only did he put the tourniquets on me, he then laid over me, like human shielded me. And it just reminded me that, like, in war, there really is a fog. There are things we wish we did differently. There are things that we look back. And certainly when I think about that grenade landing next to me, I wish I had jumped on it, but at the same time, we all lived, and I have 2 kids now, and there's so many good things that came out of it. And I think that that's the weight of combat. It's like, even though my story is unique to me, there are so many people that have I should have done this, I could have done that. I was fortunate enough that at least all my teammates lived through it. So it's an experience that's very difficult to really unpack, because I think so much of it has been layered with guilt and with, second guessing myself, and, feeling a sense of extreme gratitude, but also indebtedness to the people that saved my life and protected me. I mean, like, at one point, like, as I'm there after my medic has literally put tourniquets on to save my life, my teammates like huddle around me to like protect me from being shot again, or to being shot. And like, they've all been wounded. It was just this insane thing where, like, I look back and like that moment afterwards where things have gone completely sideways and everyone just is in it for each other. Like, things have gone badly. They've gone as bad as they can, but everyone's first instinct is to protect the other, protect the team, and get out of there alive. And we all did. And it's just, I told the command master chief afterwards, I'm like, now I can appreciate what Navy SEALs do, and frankly, what frontline combat troops do. Now that I've seen something go sideways, it's amazing what American military can do.
Yeah, absolutely. So after the grenade goes off and you're medic, I mean, you get medevaced out. I mean, what happens next? Do you wake up in a hospital, in a military, army hospital, cache, whatever you want to call it, somewhere? Or are you in Germany? What's going on?
Yeah, so we called in a bird to pick us up. They couldn't land right where we were because it was just too tight. It was a very urban environment. And they stood me up. I had tourniquets on both my legs, and, everyone's banged up at this point. And our only option was to literally run about 800 meters to the chopper that was coming in. I don't really remember it very well. But basically we ran through a city we were under attack, like people were just, like the fighters were just kind of arbitrarily shooting kind of generally towards where this initial grenade site was. And so we just like ran to the chopper, and then me and the other guy who was badly wounded and the medic as well just got on the chopper, and they flew us to a field hospital. And the most intense thing, even though that was a very intense experience, was when we arrived at the field hospital, where there was a number of other SEALs and operators that were, stationed at this particular place. They had heard that there had been, this injury to a couple of other operators, and they were coming in for kind of an emergency surgery. And so when we arrived at this place, and we go into the tent, like the big medical tent, it's the middle of the night, and the whole surgery team and all the doctors and everything are like waiting to receive us, just like, on the movies. And in the tent are like 30 operators that have put on their uniform, which nobody does, in Afghanistan. to receive us in case, the worst happens, in case one of us goes. They were there to like be with us in the initial wave of emergency surgeries in medicine. And I remember realizing that even though I'm still alive now, I don't know if I'm going to live. And it was like, at least my brothers are here with me. And it was just amazing. And so I went through, for me, luckily, a lot of it was, just lots of frag in my leg and hip. And so it was mostly just cleaning it and pulling out the pieces, and, transferred to another hospital in Afghanistan, and then ultimately went to Landstuhl in Germany, where pretty much all, military casualties go on their way back home to the States. And literally like 10 days after the injury in Afghanistan, I'm like literally pushing a shopping cart in Home Depot with my wife, like hobbling through Home Depot with my wife. So
Wow.
It was just like a crazy experience.
That's quick.
Yeah, well, they basically allowed us to be outpatient because at this point I was stable, and it was just had lots of gauze and bandaging, and my buddy wasn't so lucky. He had to stay in the hospital for a little bit longer, but I just went in like almost on a daily basis for wound care.
Do you still have any shrapnel in your legs?
Yeah, I do. They're small though. There's like 26 pieces, but they're like little tiny shards of glass. And there's one on my hip I can feel, but I mean, I have all my limbs, and it's a small price to pay for being alive and being mobile.
Wow. Okay. So at this point, you are medically retired. They medically retire you on the spot, or what happens?
No. So I actually ended up doing another platoon because I got surgery on my shoulder because I got banged up from the grenade as well, and kind of patched me up. And I went into another platoon because I really wanted to. I honestly kind of like gun decked, didn't really do a lot of the rehab because I was so like intent on getting back into a platoon. So I did, but very early in that second rotation, my wife and I and my family, I think we just realized that, like, you know what? I think my luck has run out. It really felt that way. And we made the decision, and I really do say we. I feel like this was definitely a family decision, and I definitely stand behind it. We were like, you know what? It's time to, if we're going to end this thing, we got to end it after your first contract's up. So I knew I had another rotation to do, another platoon that I did, but I knew really 4 years before it even happened that I was going to get out of the military. And so my exit date was 2018, and in early 2015, I've decided that I'm going to do this next rotation, but I am 100% getting out of the military. And it wasn't going to be on a medical retirement. It was just going to be on, I'm getting out. That's what I'm doing. And so I'm prepping. I'm like, I'm going to go to, business school because, I did have a degree, college degree. So I'll figure I'll go to get my graduate degree, and I'll go, become a consultant or something. I had it all mapped out for, again, like an exit in 2018. But in early 2017, about a year and a half before I was expecting to, get out and pursue business school, there was this kind of strange mistake that had been made on my enlistment contract that wasn't visible to me. Couldn't really, I still don't even really understand what it was, but it effectively prematurely ended my contract. And I found out about it when I had what I thought was a year and a half until I'd be getting out or going to business school and that whole thing. I found out that they were like, hey, you can either re-enlist basically right now, or you're going to be out in 8 weeks, because that's what's happened. And there's no exception to this. You're just in an unfortunate position. And so all the planning and thought around getting out, going to business school, and having that be my transition plan was really shot, because I hadn't even applied to business school yet. And we're talking about being income less in 8 weeks. And I didn't want to re-enlist for really strong reasons. And so I was just caught in this quagmire where it's like, in the Navy, people are like, dude, your wife is pregnant with your second child. You don't have health insurance. You don't have money if you get out, in 8 weeks. But at home with my pregnant wife, it's like, no, we're getting out. We can't do this anymore. This is the end for us. And so I was like, I guess I got to find a job. And so this is really how Elite Meat came to be. And ultimately, I connected with this guy on LinkedIn named Jordan Selleck, former investment banker. I was really just looking for help anywhere I could get it, and I didn't know where to look. This guy was like, hey, why don't you come to New York, meet some people in my network. Maybe you'll meet someone that'll give you a job. And I was like, great, that sounds awesome. I'll bring some of my buddies or get out of the teams too. And so we had our first kind of ever elite meet event back in March of 2017. And out of the attendees that went, the veterans, 5 were offered jobs. And kind of ironically, I wasn't offered a job because people assumed that my job was running these networking events. So it's kind of ironic, but valuable to the community. And, I was reaching the end of my 8-week window where I didn't have a job. We'd come up with a cool networking idea, but I didn't have a job. And so I went in to kind of process out of the Navy, and like the people that look at your medical file, they're like, John, like you put in for a surgery to have a piece of shrapnel pulled from your hip, and now you just kind of arbitrarily canceled it. Like that's a combat related injury. We proved it. It's going to happen. And you got to reschedule it, or, how are we going to handle this? Because it was basically scheduled after my 8 weeks were up. And I was like, well, I can't do it because I'm out of the military. And it turned into this whole thing where they looked into my medical file, and I had all this stuff that had happened from, this injury. And they're like, John, you need to have this stuff looked at. You got to get this surgery. They're like, you know what? We're going to put you on a med board because like you're a prime candidate for this. And somebody, like by a miracle, they put me on a medical board. And, within, 6 months to a year, I knew I was going to be retired, but it allowed me about a year of working on Elite Meet so that when I was medically retired for the injuries, I just stepped into Elite Meet full time, and that's what I'm doing now.
Well, and the benefit to being medically retired, obviously, is you get the health benefits, right? You're covered by the government because of the government injury, as opposing to if you had just gotten out, none of that would have been there for you.
That's exactly right. Yeah, so I feel extremely fortunate. I mean, me and my wife joked that like the best thing that happened to us was the grenade, because the grenade is what allowed us to, one, it prompted my decision to get out, which prompted the creation of Elite Meet, which prompted the, med board, which allowed Elite Meet to grow to where now I'm actually at one of our conferences in Atlanta. We have 500 plus members that are like taking advantage of this really cool platform we built for, special operations and fighter pilots looking for cool jobs. So it's really a win all around. It just took a grenade to do it.
Crazy. I mean, just, dear Lord. So Elite Meet in and of itself just specializes in helping former special operators get jobs. I mean, is that the bottom line of it?
Yeah, I think that, at its core, the idea is within the kind of veteran population, there are all these different types of jobs that are really specialized. And I thought that, by taking people from the special operations community, which have, similar experiences, and then also we brought in fighter pilots as well, that we could kind of put them under one umbrella and say they have a lot of these traits, they're these elite class of veterans, and we could kind of advertise them collectively to employers that probably don't have easy access or would even know where to begin in trying to hire these folks or how they plug them in. So we end up kind of serving as a broker between this particular set of veterans and employers that either actively are seeking, operators and fighter pilots to work for them, or we educate them and tell them, we talked about, a growing startup that could really use a strong operational mind. Like, we're a good fit for you. We reach out to those companies. We say, hey, we have, 5-6 people that'd be great for your company. But the cool thing about us as an organization is, we're a charity, and one of the things we do is we help people get jobs, but we don't do, there's no fee associated with getting people a job. It's all about the veteran. Everything's paid for, and all we care about is if we connect you to a company and you get a job there, great. We want you to be happy there. We want the company to be happy too, but we really care about you, the veteran. And as a member of Elite Meet, you get to stay in perpetuity, and like you can come back and take advantage of the network we have time and time again. It's more like a club that you join and it forever supports you. So it's kind of a hybrid between a recruiting firm and like a veteran career assistance charity, where we care about metrics, we care about, job placement data, but we're also very community minded, and we make sure that the veterans feel like they're truly kind of holistically supported as they make their way out of, military into civilian.
Amazing stuff. Again, John Allen, founder, CEO of Elite Meet and former Navy SEAL. Incredible story. Thank you so much for joining us, brother. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
This has been another episode of the Kill Cliff Podcast. Join us next week.
WFON
and W292EV Marietta,
a Dickey broadcasting station.
Live from the Wellstar Health System Studios.
1230 and 106.3 FM, The Sports X.